you go.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Erica Pedroza from Indiana Minority Health Coalition for getting this set up. I'll be saying a little bit more about that, about you in just a moment. But right now, I just want to welcome everyone who is here at this webinar. We're calling it Truths, Myths, and Tips, a COVID-19 webinar for vaccines concerning underserved groups in Allen County. I think that we've heard quite a bit about vaccination and the pandemic and coronavirus over the past year. What we have not heard so much about, and what we're hoping to hear today, what we will hear today, is some information that's specific to us, to our community here in Allen County. And so myself, Sharon Tubbs, I should introduce myself. I am Sharon Tubbs. I am the director for Health Visions Midwest, the Fort Wayne location. And we are conducting this webinar in association with the Indiana Minority Health Coalition. So Erica Pedroza, who I mentioned earlier, is with IMHC. And we probably have some IMHC affiliates on the call today. But we want to welcome you. We want to welcome the Allen County community to this webinar because we know that many of you have questions that have gone unanswered and you need information, information that is specific to people of color. And by people of color, I mean African Americans, I mean Latinos, I mean Burmese community. We want to know things that pertain to our communities because the information oftentimes that's in the mainstream media does not necessarily pertain to those communities. So we don't want those communities to be overlooked. And so that's why we're doing what we're doing here today. So without further ado, we're going to get started here. We have an hour and a half packed full of information. We've got a presentation that's going to come. We've got some questions that have already been submitted, and we're going to have some more questions that you will be able to submit live during this webinar. So what's going to happen? We're going to have three panelists, esteemed panelists, I'm going to call them. I hope they don't get shy about that title, but I'm going to call them esteemed panelists. And they're going to talk from their expertise in this community about COVID-19, the virus, and the vaccination procedures. So we're going to have those panelists. I'm going to introduce them in just a second. Dr. Sutter, who I'm going to introduce, is going to give a presentation. And then we're going to have some questions for the panelists that I'm going to ask. And then we're going to open it up to the floor for a Q&A. After the webinar, this whole webinar is going to be recorded and posted on YouTube. And we're going to send that link to you after the webinar. So you're going to have access to this. I know there are some community leaders and leaders of various agencies here in Allen County, and you're going to want to share this with your constituents. You're going to want to share this with your clients and people that you serve, or just people that you know in the community, okay? We've got some various people in the community here who aren't leaders, but who want information, and so we are here to give that information. I want to give a quick note, and that note is that this webinar is offered for informational purposes only. It is not intended to be an endorsement or any kind of denunciation of vaccination. The panelists' views do not necessarily reflect those of the host agencies, and that would be Health Visions Midwest and IMHC. So I just want to put that out there. We're not trying to force you to take the vaccine, and we're certainly not trying to discourage you from doing so. We just want you to be informed so that you can make the best decision for you. So that you can make the best decision for you and your family. So, as I said, I'm Sharon Tubbs with Health Visions Midwest. I'm going to be your moderator today. We're co-hosting with IMHC, that voice that some of you heard in the very beginning and that may pop up every now and then to keep me straight. That's Erica Pedroza. She's with the Indiana Minority Health Coalition, which is a great organization based in Indianapolis, but that has affiliates, including Health Visions, all over the state. So right now, I'm going to go on ahead and do a brief introduction of our panelists, And as they each come on throughout the program, they may give you some more information about themselves. First, we want to introduce, I'm going to stop my share here so that you can see them a little bit better. We're going to introduce Dr. Matthew Sutter. Dr. Sutter, can you raise your hand just so no one will be confused? That's him right down there. Dr. Sutter is our Allen County Health Commissioner. So many of you have seen him before. Some of you have not, because he's relatively new to the position. Just started less than a year ago. Yes, okay, yes. And he wears a number of different hats throughout the community, throughout the health community here. But as the health commissioner, he is the executive officer of the Allen County Department of Health, okay? Next, I want to introduce Dr. Justin Mcgee. Dr. Justin, could you raise your hand? Okay, there he is. So Dr. Mcgee is an emergency medicine physician here in Fort Wayne. He works with the professional emergency physicians. Did I say that right? Okay, professional emergency physicians, which is a group, obviously, of emergency medical physicians, and they contract and do work at different hospitals throughout the community. So you may have seen him at Parkview or some other places in the community, okay? And then last but not least, I want to introduce Palermo Galindo. I hope I said, did I say that right? I'm trying to use my Spanish inflections here.
Yes,
Palermo
you did a great
Galindo.
job. Thank you.
So Palermo is the community liaison with the city of Fort Wayne. And in his role, he does a lot of outreach with various communities, various groups in the community, including Spanish speakers, Burmese community, and you may have seen him on social media. He often does a lot of Spanish outreach and just different shows in Spanish on Facebook Live and all of that kind of stuff. In fact, he has collaborated with one of our staff members here at Health Visions, Gabby Lemos, and they often get together and do things to inform Spanish speakers in Fort Wayne. So we want to welcome each of you to this webinar, and thank you so much for taking your time today to do this. We know this was not easy to get all of these people together to do this from your busy schedule. So we are grateful for you today. So first, we want to start off with Dr. Sutter, and he's going to give a presentation, and then after his presentation, we're going to have Dr. Mcgee and Palermo come in and answer some questions and talk about their role in the community as well. So Dr. Sutter, would you like to begin your presentation and share your screen?
Absolutely, thanks Sharon. And again, really appreciate you setting this up. I'm Matt Sutter, I'm the Allen County Health Commissioner, as Sharon mentioned there. I'm actually an emergency doctor by training and still practice a bit, so emergency medicine is well represented today. And I want to talk just a little bit about vaccines and some things that you may already know, some things that you may not know about the specific COVID-19 vaccines. Sorry, I'm having just a bit of difficulty here. I'm going to stop that for just a second, check my slides.
Dr. Sutter, as you get that going, I neglected to talk to the panel, not the panelists, but our participants about questions. I mentioned that we're going to have some questions later on. There is a Q&A feature down at the bottom of the screen, and we would really prefer if you would put your questions in that Q&A feature. It's easier for us to keep track. And so at the end of these different presentations, then we will begin to go into your questions and get those answered. I see some of them have already been chatting with each other. Hi, how you guys doing? Hi, Elka, and all you different participants here. We are just welcoming you. Stacy, thank you for coming out. Are you ready, Dr. Sutter?
Sure, I mean, it looks like it's working now. So
okay, yeah. Wonderful.
So, I want to start off with just some of the virology and the basic science about the virus that causes COVID-19. There's two things one thing to mention. COVID or COVID-19 is what we're used to talking about. That's the disease. That's the illness that you actually get. And it's caused by this virus called SARS-CoV-2 virus. They're kind of distinct. So the corollary would be like HIV and AIDS. AIDS is the disease. that you get if you get infected by the HIV virus. And it looks basically like this. This is a picture. There's this really long link of genetic material. It's actually 30,000 links in the chain, which is really long for a virus. And it's RNA as opposed to DNA. They're similar, but both of them encode for genetic material. And then around that is this shell, basically, or envelope, that's basically fat or a lipid. It's got 2 layers to it. And that's what kind of holds the genetic material inside. And then we can see several proteins that are on the surface and inside. And those are important because those become targets for the body's immune system to fight viruses and also for the vaccines itself. So we'll talk more about them. You've seen pictures like this. And in fact, in my upper left-hand corner, there's a little picture with these red spike proteins all over the surface of the virus. Those spike proteins are what the virus uses to attach to a cell to then infect the cell. And they're the target of all the vaccines that are currently been approved and all the ones that are currently close to the pipeline and being approved. When you look at vaccine types, there's really 4 basic vaccine types. The oldest would be whole pathogen. And that's basically where you take a virus and we commonly use the term kill it. You can't really kill it because viruses aren't alive. They don't generate energy. They are simply genetic material that infect cells and make copies of themselves. That's all viruses do, any virus. So they're inactivated by some either chemical or by heat or by radiation. And then the vaccine is basically that virus, that inactivated virus injected into the body. We are not currently looking at any inactivated COVID-19 vaccines, but an example would be the vaccine for hepatitis A that uses an inactivated virus as the way it has the immune system recognize it. Another would be to use the virus itself, but rather than completely inactivate it or kill it, you would just change it in a way that makes it less serious. So you still get infected by the virus, but it doesn't cause the really bad things that you would associate it with it. An example of this would be the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. That's actually virus that's been changed so it doesn't give you a full illness. You still get an infection though by those viruses. These approaches have not been used for COVID-19 because we're not sure exactly how to inactivate it and because it changes the spike protein if you inactivate it. And it makes the body not react in the same way. So they've so far not been good choices. The other would be a subunit vaccine. So instead of using the whole virus, you use a piece of the virus. And there is one of them that we'll talk about that does this, in this case, the spike protein. So rather than the whole virus, you just manufacture spike protein, and the shot is basically the spike protein. The downside to this is they're pretty easy to make. If you've got a good protein target like the spike protein is in this virus, they can work out pretty well, but the body doesn't recognize this the way it does a whole virus. And so a lot of times the way it attacks it is not very robust. And as a result, you may not get good memory. And coronaviruses are just really tough with this. They are tough for the body's immune system to recognize and to maintain a memory of. And we're still learning more about that. And then there's kind of 2 newer approaches. So these are kind of the older approaches, the whole pathogen and subunit. One is using another virus, typically what we think of like a common cold virus, as a vector to put genetic material into a cell, in this case with a spike protein, and have the body, our body, make its own spike protein. Then our immune system recognizes that as a foreign invader, attacks it, and then builds up a memory. And then the last one is really new, which is using messenger RNA. So there's no viruses in this at all. It's some genetic material inside some little nanoparticles that enter the cells themselves. They basically turn the cells into factories to build spike proteins. And then the body recognizes the spike protein, fights it off. And then if we look at where we're at with current vaccines, there's 2 that are approved under emergency use authorization, which is kind of a special fast track approval. That's the Pfizer and the Moderna. Most of the time the hospitals are given Pfizer right now, and like the Coliseum site and most of the local health departments are given Moderna. They're almost exactly the same. The interval you give the second dose on is a little bit different, but the way they're formulated, It's proprietary, so we don't know exactly, but as best I can tell from examining this, I view them as essentially equivalent. Their efficacy rates equivalent, their adverse effects are really equivalent. I see them as pretty much interchangeable. And then we have 3 vaccines that may soon be approved. Most likely the next one will be Johnson & Johnson. That uses a viral vector. It uses a virus called adenovirus, which gives basically a cold variant if you get it. And it delivers genetic material into the cell. It's RNA material, it's not DNA, so it doesn't change your DNA or anything like that. But it does get that cell that gets infected by this virus, it starts making spike protein. And then the spike protein is recognized by our body. The AstraZeneca, which you may have heard of, has been approved in several other countries. It's still not received approval in the United States. And the FDA has had some concerns with their application, it sounds like. Some of the study sites seem like they were a little bit sloppy. And so I think they're trying to get a better sense of that before they issue an approval. And then the other one that's coming soon is the Novavax, which is a subunit protein. When we talk about how vaccines get approved, many people have been concerned about the fact that it's been so fast. And that's one of the questions I get frequently is, can we trust this because it's happened so fast? There's 3 sets of trials that you go through in order to get approval. The first one is a phase 1 trial. Basically, you have healthy volunteers and they get injected, and it's basic safety. Like, does the arm fall off? Does something really horrible happen? Did they grow a third eye? That's the first level thing, is just, is this safe to even try on groups of humans? Assuming that goes well, you move on to a phase 2 trial where you enroll hundreds of people. You start drawing antibody levels. You start trying to find markers for how effective this drug or this vaccine may or may not be. You try a couple different kinds of doses to try and find the dose that gives you the best effect with the least amount of side effects. And then if you pass your phase 2 trial, you go on to the phase 3 trial, which is typically thousands of people. And in fact, for these vaccines, it's really tens of thousands of people. And so the 5 vaccines I just talked about, there's been more than 75,000 people enrolled, but 75,000 people who got the active vaccine. And then some of them also get placebo or on basically like salt water. And then they compare the two to see who gets sick and who doesn't get sick. So there's been tens of thousands of people in the phase 3 trials. Typically what happens is you do a phase 1 trial, and then you'd evaluate it. You'd see if you wait for your approval. That might be months to even a year. Then you'd start up your phase 2 trial, and you'd start your enrolling people. That may take several months. Then you'd start your phase 2 trial. And this whole thing would take 3 to 5 years typically. What they did with this is they actually started the trials like one after the other. So as they started the phase 1 trial, they were already enrolling for the phase 2 trial. As they're finishing up the phase 2 trial, even before they know the answer and whether they're going to get approval, they're already ramping up a phase 3 trial. Now, they had approval before they started everyone, but what they did is they took all the gaps out. So typically there would be gaps of months to even a year between these trials. And in this case, they were all one right after the other. And in fact, because of the funding from the US government, they were actually started manufacturing during the phase 3 trials. So in many ways, this was a gamble because we didn't know if these would be approved. We didn't know if they would be effective. We didn't know if they would be safe, frankly, when we started all this. And the company started manufacturing before we knew any of those answers. But there's a rigorous process, and the FDA has been very good at looking through this. And frankly, we just got really lucky. So it turns out that many viruses don't have such an easy target as that spike protein. That spike protein has ended up being a tremendous target. And the mRNA vaccines, which are new, have been spectacularly effective. So 95% effectiveness at stopping all symptomatic disease. So that's even getting a cold with it. And nobody who's gotten those vaccines has died of COVID-19 after getting it. That's amazing. That's way better than what we were hoping for. And the safety profile has looked great. I'll talk more about that in just a second. Once there's the approval, there's the EUA, the Emergency Use Authorization, which those 2 vaccines, Moderna and Pfizer, are operating under. And then there will be a formal approval process probably later in the spring or maybe early summer. That's a little bit different process. that allows those companies to sell the vaccine. Right now, they can only provide them basically to the government under an EUA. Now they can sell them, to doctors' offices, to whomever else. And then the testing continues. So even though the phase 3 trials are done, they're still tracking all those people and gathering data. So we learn more about this every month.
Dr. Sutter?
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're good. I'm sorry. I got a couple of questions here in the Q&A, and I think it might be appropriate for you to just kind of answer these right now while you're talking about this topic.
Sure.
One of the questions is there an appropriate time interval for each phase of the trial?
Could you say that again? I didn't quite catch that.
Is there an appropriate time interval for each phase of the trial?
Yeah, it's so phase 1 and phase 2 are pretty scripted about how they're going to roll them out and do it. Phase 3, there isn't really a time period, because what happens is you're waiting for people to get sick. So for instance, the original SARS that happened in the early 2000s, there was a vaccine for SARS, but it died out. The infections all went away, and it burned itself out before we could test the vaccine. What's happened, MERS did the same thing. So MERS was Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome. It was another coronavirus, very deadly, but not nearly as infectious. There was a vaccine, but it burned itself out before they could test it in phase 3 trials. What was really good, if you can say there's something good about a pandemic, is we were having so many cases in the United States that the phase 3 went really quick because people were getting infected all the time. So the phase 3 is indeterminate. You have to wait for people to get infected, and they're waiting for generally about 150 infections. And then they unblind the data and look, were the people who are getting infected the ones who got the vaccine or the ones who got the placebo? Does that answer the question?
I think so. And that was Calvin Roberson who asked that question. And then there's one from Tyra Watson, and she wants to know, do you have any idea why the Merck vaccine trial stopped? Any idea?
Yeah, well, what I understand was it just wasn't that effective. And that's what you expect. I mean, the reason that these go on over a long time period is because there's a lot of money at stake for the companies, and they don't want to risk the money unless everything looks really good. This was recognizing the fact that people are dying, and we got to get this out fast. And so there was a big financial risk. Now, the government ended up underwriting a lot of that risk to get the vaccines going. But that's the reason why companies felt comfortable being able to take one right after the other without taking really long periods of time. And what you expect is you hope that some of them are going to be effective, right? But you don't know that. And it's not surprising that some of them are just not going to work because of either the way they formulated the spike protein, whether there's something else. And so that's why you have to do the testing. And Merck, when they did the testing, just didn't look positive. So.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so this was in the New York Times, the morning brief on Monday, and it was really neat. I hadn't seen anybody else. He was making the point, the reporter, that we're kind of looking at the wrong thing. When we talk about 95% effectiveness for Moderna or Pfizer, when we talk about 70% effectiveness for AstraZeneca, when we talk about between 70 and 90 maybe for the Johnson & Johnson, that's all about people who get sick in any way. What we really care about are who are the people who get sick enough to be hospitalized, and who are the people who get sick enough to die. And all of these viruses look great. So most people are saying, I don't really mind that much if somebody gets a cold from COVID-19. I just don't want them on oxygen in the hospital. I don't want them dying. And so far, all 5 of these vaccines, even though some of them are down, at the 60 to 70% efficacy rate in terms of symptomatic disease, they've been spectacular about stopping death. And none of these 75,000 people who've been vaccinated in the phase 3 trials have died of COVID-19. And you would expect, if they've not been vaccinated, out of that 75,000, you'd expect about 150 people to die. If they were getting influenza, you'd expect about 5 to 15 people out of that 75,000 to die. If they got the flu, that's about the typical death rate for infection. And so far, we're at 0. Now, that might not stay at 0. It's possible that some people might still have a fatal illness after receiving the vaccine if they get infected again. But even so, if we can drive this down to under the flu, we can manage that. We can't manage 10 times the death rate of the flu. That overwhelms healthcare systems. It leads to the more than 400,000 dead we've seen in the United States. But these all look phenomenal from that standpoint. And so these are just a couple quick questions that I keep getting a lot. And one is, does it keep you from getting infected? And we don't know exactly. So what we know is that they're spectacular with disease immunity, which means if you get infected, you don't get hospitalized and you don't die. We don't know for sure whether it causes sterilizing immunity, which means you can't get infected at all. Now, those studies are ongoing. We expect to know more in the next few months. My guess is we'll find that you can still get infected. You may not have symptoms. My guess is you probably don't spread much, but maybe you spread a little bit. But until we know that, even if you get vaccinated, you still have to wear a mask. You still have to protect, you still have to act in a way that's responsible so that if you happen to still get infected, not have symptoms, you don't spread it to other people. The other question I get is, how long does this protection last? How long is the vaccine good for? And the honest answer is we don't know. It just hasn't been around long enough. So we can make theories about that. And the theory is probably 1 to 2 years with pretty good immunity. But until we have time, we just don't know. There are reasons to think that the immunity you get from a vaccine is better than the natural immunity you get from catching the virus. We do know that people are getting reinfected, and you probably have pretty good immunity for 3 months. And after that, it probably wanes. It's still rare to get reinfected, but it's certainly happening. Vaccine-wise, we don't know, but so far the early stuff looks very good. What are the adverse effects? So adverse effects are pretty light with the mRNA vaccines. That's the ones we've seen so far. Most people will get a little bit of arm pain. About 51% will get mild. Maybe 20% will get worse arm pain than that. Many people will get kind of fatigue and body aches and maybe even low-grade fevers, more likely after the second shot. It also seems to be more likely the younger you are. And that's actually not a bad thing. It means your immune system is really kicking up and attacking that spike protein, which means you're more likely to have better memory later if you do get exposed to the virus. The serious effects is there are some severe allergic reactions, and we've seen those. Pfizer a little bit more than Moderna. Pfizer's running about 1 in 100,000 doses will get a severe allergic reaction. Some of those people have had to go to the emergency department. I've not seen any deaths from that, but they can be serious. However, that's about, your lifetime risk of being struck by lightning is about 1 in 10,000. So it's about 10 times your lifetime risk of being struck by lightning that you'll have one of these severe allergic reactions. However, if you've had a severe allergic reaction to a vaccine in the past, then you probably need to not get that right now and wait till other vaccines come out. If you've had a severe allergic reaction to other things, bee stings are normally okay. IV contrast for CAT scans probably okay. Some food things might be an issue, so you may want to consult your doctor. If you've had something so bad you have to carry an EpiPen around, it's worth asking your doctor. Are there long-term effects? We don't know. Honest answer, don't know. We don't expect there to be. This is an RNA vaccine, the two that are out. They only last for about 48 hours in the body and then they degrade. They don't get incorporated into your DNA. It's a separate type of genetic material. And the other thing that I say is, even if there are, you've got to weigh that against the long-term effects of getting infected with COVID-19. What we know is that people, even with mild illness with COVID-19, have changes to their lungs. If you do a CAT scan on them, even with people with mild disease, you'll see the scar tissue throughout their lung. Most people, they do fine with it. They don't seem to notice too much, but athletes, they can notice the difference. We don't know what that's going to be in 10 years. It may be that that ends up being really bad and causing chronic lung disease. It may be that it's no issue at all. We just don't know. But if I'm trying to figure out which am I more worried about, long-term effects of a vaccine that lasts for less than 48 hours and has no discernible effects so far, or long-term effects of a virus that causes lung disease, that causes heart disease in some people, that affects nerves, and we know has long-term effects in many, I'm definitely putting my money on the vaccine. And then this is a new one. Which vaccine should I get? Now that we got all these vaccines, or may soon have all these vaccines, how do I pick the best one? My answer right now is for most people, it's whichever one you can get. So, there's not nearly enough vaccine to go around right now. I got a Pfizer because that's what they happen to have. If it was a Moderna, it'd have been fine. I haven't seen the Johnson & Johnson phase 3, but if it's as good as the preprint look, if it was a Johnson & Johnson, I'd say fine, I'll take that one. So far, I've not found any that it's like, okay, you definitely want to get that one, or you definitely don't want to get that one. There's probably a couple things. If you've got bad immune system problems, if you're severely immunocompromised, getting one like the mRNA that doesn't have any vaccine, it doesn't have any virus in it at all, might be better than the viral vector ones. Because even though we don't expect problems, it's still a virus. So, in that case, there might be a little that maybe one's better than the other, but for the vast majority of people, not seeing big differences right now. This is questions, but you may want to go on to the other speakers first, and then we can handle questions however you want to manage it, Sharon.
I think I will, Doctor. I'll go on to Dr. Mcgee. We've got a lot of questions coming in, which is great. So you sparked some interest here. So we will look forward to getting some of those questions answered by you and by Dr. Mcgee and by Palermo Galindo. So right now, Dr. Justin, can I call you Dr. Justin?
Yes, that's absolutely fine.
Okay, so Dr. Justin or Dr. Mcgee, I want to ask you just a couple of questions as well. Talk a little bit about your time on the front lines of this pandemic and how that has affected you and what you've seen, because you've been in the ER here.
Yeah, I mean, just being in the ER, seeing a lot of this it's you see the entire gamut. You see people come in who really have mild to no symptoms at all, maybe a runny nose, maybe they notice a change in their taste or smell, maybe they had a little bit of a tickle in their throat and they go on to be fine, but because of work or because of other family members, they go ahead and get tested and they'll come back positive. And I've seen the entire game where someone comes in with a lot of what we call respiratory distress, having a lot of trouble to breathe, a lot of confusion, looking very, very sick, and they have to, be intubated, which is putting a tube in their through their mouth and through their trachea to basically help them breathe and support their lungs and give them a break. You've seen people come in with, low oxygen levels, but look absolutely fine, don't really have a big complaint. So after you see the whole gamut, and you can see how it can affect a lot of people in a lot of ways. There's a lot of, in a situation like this, with this virus being novel just meaning new, meaning we haven't really seen anything like this before. We've never really dealt with anything like this before. There's a lot of questions about it, a lot of anxiety about it, a lot of unknown variables that we really have had to contend with and kind of make decisions and change decisions and in the process of doing it. So basically, we've been looking at the available data and information we have, and what we know, and making decisions based on that, and making appropriate adjustments as we get more information and more data and more knowledge about what's going on. So it's been a pretty dynamic process, I'd say.
Okay, yes, dynamic indeed. Now, speaking of the data, the CDC has talked about how disproportionate this virus is when you look at the different ethnic groups. So in terms of African Americans and Latinos, both of those groups suffer disproportionately from this virus, in that they are more, once they contract it, they are more likely to be hospitalized and more likely to die from coronavirus. Talk a little bit about your experience with that. Do you identify as African American or? Okay.
Oh, are you asking me? Yes. Yes, I identify as African American or Black. So just to be explicit about that. As far as my own difference and things like that, as far as the data available for Allen County, from what I could discern just through my own little search for looking at what's available, there's not a lot of reported demographic information in regards to race compared to that being known, at least what I was able to get access to. Colloquially, it would seem to kind of jive with the general trend of people in different ethnic and racial groups being disproportionately affected compared to their population in the general kind of community. So there does appear to be some sort of disproportion in that, in severity of sickness. It's always hard to tell because, well, personally, it's all just anecdotal information from what I see, what I can tell. I've seen people of all races come in pretty sick. I've seen people come in pretty mild. Again, does it seem to fit with the disproportionate nature of it? just based on the numbers and things like that, I would say yes. I would say that does appear to be the case. And the question is underlying it. Why is that the case? What is going on? And this is one of those situations where there's no one variable that's isolated in a vacuum that's gonna kind of explain of all of why it is the way it is. It's a combination of, socioeconomic status, of underlying health issues, of, access to care, of, understanding of navigation and trust in the healthcare system that can kind of coalesce in a way to a lot of these, various kind of disproportionate outcomes. So but it seems everything overall seems to, be in line with what's being tacked on by the trending data from the CDC.
Well, let me cut in here just for a second. Yeah. Dr. Sutter, do you have demographic information about Allen County with regard to African Americans, Latinos, and who has been affected by this virus?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have good data either. You would expect that I would, right? Because I'm the health commissioner. But turns out, not so much. And while we've been trying to gather that data, it's just been a secondary mission behind our primary missions of testing, contact tracing, and now mass vaccination. What I've seen, though, I don't see any reason to think that Allen County is any different than the rest of the country in this, in which that communities of color are disproportionately affected. I think that's a true statement. But I don't have specific Allen County data to prove that.
Do you see the importance in gathering that data, though?
I do. I just don't have the resources to do all of it at once. I wish I did.
Okay, so Dr. Mcgee, getting back to you, talk about, as an African-American doctor, talk about the history of medical malpractice when it comes to African-Americans and people of color, because we know that is one of the reasons why there's a distrust factor with regard to these vaccines.
Yes, I mean, I definitely think that's a big part of it. And that's a piece of this kind of narrative, of this story, this history that needs to be understood. Again, it doesn't explain away because this is a complex situation. It doesn't explain away why everything is the way it is right now, but it certainly does contribute. So you see things like the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, where people were tested on, denied care, studied, research. You see things like the gynecologic experiments that happened during slavery, even in medical education itself, of using unmarked graves of African Americans, former slaves, of slaves at the turn of the century, to basically dissect and use without permission, without compensation, without acknowledgement of what is going on. So that's definitely one of the foundational roots in what is going on. It all comes down to this notion of African Americans, other minorities, people, immigrants, from various countries, even some European countries, in a way of basically people being treated as subhuman, or as, frankly, as tools to be used and discarded and not listened to or acknowledged. And it's also tied up in, tied up in the nation's history involving race and socioeconomic status and all these things that all kind of interplay. So that's kind of what some of the basic foundation that we do have to acknowledge, that these things did happen. These are all factual things that happened and do color the way things are now, and that should be acknowledged. Now, it doesn't, and you got to think about, not only do those facts happen, but what's the story around it? What's the implication of these stories? What does that signify or mean to people? And so you get this perpetual idea that, we're, basically could potentially be experimented on again, or neglected, or the outcomes of basically the canary in the coal mine, if you will, that we do all these things first and get used to, kind of deal with, these disease processes and use these tools to learn. Whereas instead of protecting people and feeling like they're being taken care of, so there's a foundation of historical kind of mistrust there, and then you compound that with, things you hear, experience from your family, or for things you see from your friends, your own personal experiences that kind of can be, you feel like you weren't listened to, or you weren't acknowledged, or the frank issue of implicit bias, which is a very basic human issue. It's a human thing. It's a human problem, because it's all rooted in the idea that the human mind tries to be as efficient as possible. And to do that, even thinking is a physiological process. Your brain will do things to make these shortcuts, but they can also lead to things like, those people over there are dangerous. those people are different from me, so I don't need to think about them like me. I don't relate to them like that. And that's forms the foundation of these implicit, visceral things that we feel when we look at people. Do we see others the same way we see ourselves or those in our close circles? And those little things that exist can kind of impact and color so much of the outcomes based on that. So it's part of it is being acknowledged, part of it's being, recognized, part of it's being recognized in other people, part of it's being recognized in ourselves, and part of it is trying to address it in a systemic way to kind of compensate or protect from those issues. So that all these things color, people's faith in the healthcare system, their trust of things, the way they will look at certain issues regarding healthcare, and especially the unknown, because this is all a big unknown, and things being unknown create a lot of anxiety and people a lot of worry, and we all try to fill in that information as best as we can to create something that makes sense in a way to give us at least some grounding and foundation of what could potentially be going on. And that needs to be, looked at, but it also needs to be, I think, really addressed in a compassionate way, but also a very factual and truthful way, to be like, yes, all these things have happened. Yes, all these things do color a lot of things. Yes, implicit bias is a real thing, but here's what we're doing to, one, acknowledge it. Here's what we're doing to address it. And here's what this is why this process that we use could basically protect us from those impacts of implicit bias. So like, I'll even use my own personal example, my own example for my family with the vaccine. When I first heard the vaccine, I mean, to a certain degree, I can be a cynical person, a suspicious person, or a very questioning person, I guess. That's one of the reasons I went into medicine, is because I have that kind of inquisitive mind about these things. When I first saw this vaccine and how it was going on, and my first thought was like, okay, like, this seems a little quick. Hey, this makes me a little nervous. I'm like, sure, this seems a little, it gave me myself a little pause. And so I said, what I would want is if I could see the data myself, and I could see what they're talking about and see what's going on, and then based on that, make my decision. When the data became available, I looked over it, and based on the efficacy that was shown, the number of participants, the demographics they tracked, the data, the available data they had, and the side effect profiles and things like that. And like Dr. Sutter was saying, this is all, when it comes to a span of unknowns, this is all about weighing the risks and benefits. This is about risk stratification and risk tolerance. And based on that, from what I could see, I thought, yeah, seems safe enough that even though there are some unknown variables, that I feel like the risk of not doing this would be higher than the risk of doing it. And for my patients and for my family, I felt like that was the most sound decision. And I'll be completely transparent. I'm in a family with a lot of other people similar to me. My father's a physician. My older sister is a physician, an OBGYN, currently pregnant. My older brother is a physician as well, doing orthopedics residency. And myself, I'm in emergency medicine. And we all looked at the data ourselves. We all looked at it together. We all kind of discussed it among ourselves, and we have all gotten the vaccine. My sister, including even herself, she's currently pregnant. And even in the state of pregnancy, she went ahead and got based on the data and what she knows available and her understanding of the science and things like that, went ahead and got the vaccine available too. And when my mom is eligible, she's down in Florida, we're getting her signed up. She's gung-ho about it. And my grandma, who is in her 90s, has gotten her vaccine as well. So I think this is a discussion that does truly need to be had, because we got to acknowledge there are some unknowns, and there's some things in history and our understanding that do color our approach to these things. But based on the data, based on what we can see, basically what can be reproduced and measured and looked at again, I mean, I think it's worth having a discussion and saying, based on those things, yeah, I think it's, I personally think it's well worth it, but I also understand that these are conversations that do need to be had, and the things people are worried about should be at least be acknowledged. I mean, of course, are there some people out there who, may believe in certain things, or no matter what information or data is presented, no matter what can change or what would be shown, would you convince them to change their mode of thinking or to do something they just really aren't frankly going to do? Most likely not. And when it comes down to it, that's okay too. But then we just talk to the people who, want to be talked to about it. So, I mean, it's a very, like I said, there's no easy answer. There's no easy answer. There's no quick soundbite
That's
for this.
for sure.
There's no one thing you can look at and say, why is this the way it is? I think
Right.
all of it needs to be acknowledged and worked through as best as it can be. And we need to take our time and be patient as we need to be with people to talk about it, but also let them know realistically that this is one of those situations where urgent action is not the wrong choice.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. McGee. That's a great segue into Mr. Galindo. I want to talk with you or ask you a couple questions rather about outreach in the city of Fort Wayne to the different groups that you talk to within your job as a community liaison. So talk about your experience working with the Latino community and what you've been seeing and experiencing with regard to the virus and the vaccine.
Yes, thank you. And first of all, I just want to, again, Director Tubbs, give you a thank you for the opportunity to be in this important meeting and have this conversation.
Thank you.
And of course, to be with our distinguished doctors. I hope everybody is enjoying the week so far. To start off, I'm not an expert in COVID or know everything about it, but I have a special interest to bring awareness to our community and provide information from reliable sources resources that are provided to the community. So the health department for Allen County, the CDC, the State Department as well. So all that information is shared through the community. When the pandemic started, I saw the opportunity to really provide information to our members, because again, as this has developed, a lot of the information is not translated into let's say in Spanish or other languages. As fast as changing and everything is evolving, our community needs to be aware. And through the collaboration of different agencies, I was able to, bring about some important information for the community. So I think we all have special skills that we can bring into this conversation, this big effort to bring awareness into our susceptible communities. And this is what I've done as the community liaison for the city of Fort Wayne. I have built a strong relationship with community members throughout the city and around the region as well. So I have taken the opportunity and the initiative to collaborate from the get-go. And you brought Gabi Lemos, who approached me about taking the test back last year. I think it was either in April, when the state was providing some testing for anyone that needed. It was nasal swab and also the blood would drawn. So she asked me to participate, and I said I will gladly do it, because again, people didn't know what to expect once put the nasal swab all the way to the nasal cavity, and also getting the blood withdrawn. And we did a short video. We posted on Facebook. We shared it with a lot of the community members. We spoke in Spanish, and then that was shared with a lot of people. People really are needing that information, because there's so much misinformation in the community. That was one. And also working with the Allen County Health Department by doing presentations through the Neighborhood Association. So as a community liaison, I have invited Mindy Waldron, who's part of the Allen County Task Force for the COVID. And then of course, just recently, Dr. Sutter was one of our guest speakers that provided information for our neighborhood presidents and the neighborhoods throughout the city. So in Fort Wayne, we have about 400 neighborhood associations, and that information has been shared throughout the city, and it's important information to have. So it's working with the Latino community, but also with the Burmese community and others susceptible communities as well. Did that answer your question?
forgot that I muted myself. So are there any particular fears or myths about the virus or the vaccine that you've encountered, Mr. Galindo?
Certainly, there's a lot of fear in the community because a lot of people do not have insurance. Others, they don't know what to expect if they take the shot. And what I hear a lot about people is that I took the flu shot a long time ago and I got sick, and I'm afraid that's gonna happen to me as well, taking the shot. They always ask me if I'm gonna take the shot when my age group comes in, and I said without a doubt, certainly I will definitely take the shot. And the risk of having minimal symptoms, it's greater than having the disease and going to hospital and staying there. So that was one of the things. Again, that information that it's on social media and other outlets that is not true. It's really detrimental to our community. So I continue to urge my colleagues and community leaders in all the communities throughout the state to really provide information in the language that their communities are strong with. So we have refugees from Burma, we have refugees from the Congolese, and refugees from just about every country. So we're trying to collaborate with the Refugee Resettlement Office. We have done a lot of collaboration with them. We did it with the Census Bureau when the census was happening last year. So we also provided information, sanitizers and all this stuff, and information that they could take it with them and read on that. But also, they need to see people that are trusted, that are known in our community, just like you and everyone else, that once that is done, we can provide that information and bring that fear down for our community members, because that's the best thing that we can provide. Yes, they can see commercials, they can see videos from people that they do not know, and if we have more collaboration amongst all the leaders, then I think that will be better to send a strong message about this pandemic.
Yes, collaboration is key, especially dealing with different people who have different perspectives and mindsets and different histories, basically, when it comes to medicine and in America. One thing that I have heard when it comes to Spanish speakers and those who are undocumented is there's a fear that getting the vaccine would somehow disqualify them from citizenship. Have you heard that?
Certainly, I have heard that as well. And, getting a benefit from the government, which again we have to bring that answer down, because it needs to be. Everybody needs this to be healthy, to be well, to be able to contribute to the country, and that's something that we are working hard to send that message. So, and
that isn't true. Is that? Can someone, maybe Dr. Sutter, can clarify?
That's not true. That's not true. And there's been broad support at the state level and at the local level that for undocumented workers, we want no barriers to them getting a vaccine once they become eligible. The only potential problem we'd run into right now is because it's an age-based eligibility, we do need some form of ID that lists a birth date. Now, most people will have, it doesn't have to be anything US. If they're from another country and they've got an ID, that's fine. We just need to see some form of ID so that we can assess the eligibility. But it has nothing to do with their citizenship status.
Okay, so there's it's not going to count against them to become citizens. Even though you're asking for ID, they don't have to pay, correct?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay.
It's free.
It's free, although you do ask for insurance cards, however, correct? However, that is not has nothing to do with the actual cost of getting the vaccine. That has to do with administrative costs, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the state has said that they plan to bill the insurance companies for the administration fee of giving the shot. I think it's $28. But they've committed that no person will get billed. The insurance companies are going to ask to pay something, because the insurance companies haven't been paying anything for this, but they're not asking individuals to pay at all. They're not going to come back after the individuals like perhaps other medical bills and stuff like that. Totally separate.
Okay. Okay. Now, Palermo, you talked about the collaboration. I was going to ask you about how different agencies and groups can come together and collaborate. Did you have anything more that you wanted to say on that?
Yes, just I want to congratulate all the organizations that are working hard to bring awareness to our communities. Again, it's a never-ending task because there's so much information that we have to provide. But one of the things I believe is just being constant and staying on top of that, and really, you know, building those relationships that we have in asking others as well, because I'm the only one, I'm the only liaison, so I need a lot more of or my colleagues and friends to really, and family members too, to provide this information that is liable, and it's certain information that you can get a true source of information. So we need that transmitted to all of our community members. And again, if someone has, you know, said that, you know, the DNA is going to change your injecting that vaccine into your body, then, you know, we got to talk to them and provide them, you know, with the CDC guidelines, you know, any information that we can knock that lie off and then just move on, so we can continue to educate our community members and provide the trusted information that's out there for our community.
Okay, thank you, Palermo. You're getting some love on Facebook, by the way. They're talking about what a trusted community leader you are. So kudos to you for all that you do. For this last half hour, we definitely want to dig into some of the questions that are flowing in, and just to piggyback off of what we were just discussing, Nurse Carmen Moore wants to clarify that when it comes to undocumented residents, not only will that not count against them for citizenship, but they won't be reported. Is that true?
Absolutely. They
As
will not be
undocumented.
reported. Yeah, I mean, we look for an ID just to get an age, but we're not keeping IDs. We're not, again, there is no intent to do anything negative with anybody who comes to get a vaccine. And we're aware of the fears of that community. And absolutely not, we're not going to be reporting anybody.
Okay. Now you are asking for the state database, right? You're asking for more than age. You've got to report the names.
The state does have a database so they can track vaccinations. That's to keep people from getting revaccinated, for one thing, to understand which vaccine they got there. And it's also for data reporting. But no, there is no intent to report anybody, or, you know, I don't care what their immigration status is. Okay. Anybody who's eligible, I want to get a vaccine in their arm. That's, you know.
Okay, so that we've got that out there. Now I'm going to get to some of the questions that were pre-submitted. I had a couple of those who were talking about the process of getting the vaccine and the distribution. Sarah Castillo talked about why are all the locations booked up, and also Phyllis Bragg mentioned this as well. Having a very rough time if you're wanting to get this vaccine, having a very tough time actually getting an appointment, and also calling 211. One woman said that she had to stay on the phone for 2 hours and then finally hung up, so that didn't work either. Dr. Sutter, can you address some of these complications?
Yeah, it's a problem. We don't have enough vaccine to go around right now. And what I want is enough vaccine to vaccinate everybody who wants it, and I don't have that. So what the state has done is they match appointments to the number of vaccines that are allocated to each place. So for instance, if in the Coliseum we get an extra 200 doses, they'll open up an extra 200 appointments. Those appointments open up as we get more vaccine, but when they announce a new eligibility, like for instance, Sunday when they announced the 65 and over, this is a big group of people. It's a couple 100,000 people, and they are all within a 12-hour period. Everybody, or at least half that group, suddenly wants the vaccine because they're eligible. That's in some ways a good problem to have from a, we want people getting the vaccine, but it's a demand problem that we just don't have enough vaccine to go around, and as a result, the appointments have to get pushed out. Our hope is that the vaccine manufacturers will continue ramping up their production so we can get more and more vaccine, and that as more vaccines get approval, we'll have access to more vaccines that way. So I expect it to expand and get easier, but at least for these first few months, it's going to be tight, which means it's hard to get appointments.
Okay, all right. So we only get a specific amount allocated to our area, and once those are used up, that's why the appointments are so hard to come by.
Correct. Yeah, the federal government's allocating to the states are allocating to the locals and to the hospitals, and it's all based on population data to try and make that even.
Is there a possibility of long-term effects? Doctor, I think you did address this and basically said there's no way to know for sure.
Well, you can't tell about long-term effects until you've had long-term. Okay. So if you want to know, you got to watch people for 10 years. So if we want to wait for 10 years, watch everybody and then say, oh yeah, it looks fine. We should have gotten the vaccines 10 years ago. That'd be one way to go, but it's not going to make much sense. So unfortunately, we have to go from what we know from other vaccines, which is long-term effects are none or minimal. And we need to risk benefit, as Dr. Mcgee, I think, really well said. It's not just about, what are your risks of taking the vaccine, it's what's your risk of not taking the vaccine, which is likely getting infected with COVID-19 and dealing with potential long-term effects from that. Okay. We know that's got long-term effects.
Jake Christensen wants to know, what's the best way to address vaccine misinformation?
Yeah, critical thinking at every level of our society, and trusted sources of information. I blame, for many years in this country, there's been an anti-expert movement, and we have devalued experts in our community and found ways to not trust them. Other countries don't have that in the same way. Every country's got that a little bit, but in a crisis like this, it really comes out. And so if everybody on Facebook has the same level of credibility, you've got the people in your high school who are crazy talking, and they've got just the same voice as everybody else. I didn't listen to those people in high school. I try not to listen to them now. I think a lot of it is trying to, the things that you're doing right now, getting people with knowledge, with subject matter experts, who are educated with credentials, who can be trusted voices, hopefully, and just kind of keep combating that.
Yeah.
Dr. Mcgee, do you have anything to add to that? What would you say to people that may have some misinformation that in your circle?
I mean, yes, that's all, and that's also some of this involves. Yeah, as Dr. Sutter was saying, there really is no very simple answer to this because it's a very multifactorial issue. So you got to figure out one of the things that can help is if you can use your own discernment to try to determine if whoever you're talking to, if there's someone who's actually open to, if they're approaching it in a good faith way or a bad faith way, if they're approaching it out of curiosity or to know things, or are they asking questions to make statements? So that can kind of tell you, because there's always going to be people, no matter what you say, no matter how much evidence you give them, no matter what you do, if there's a 0.01% chance of something being, not true or unfactually not provable to that degree, there's not really going to be much you can do to convince them. All you can do is hope they change their mind at some point, be open to being receptive to that. But I would say try to spend more time with people and talking to people about things that it's more of an unknown thing and they are open to new information changing their minds. So part of it's setting the stage for it. I think really seeing where people are coming from. So say you hear like here's one I've heard, one example that I heard, that this vaccine is going to it can be used to implant microchips into you. So part of that is seeing trying to, instead of being like, no, that doesn't really make sense, that's absurd, and kind of being dismissive, you could approach it like, what do you mean by that? Try to get people to explain more from their own standpoint what they're talking about, why that would work, or what the intent would be, what the purpose is. You also can go through the logistics and mechanics of it all. Like, so if you look at, like, if someone injected a microchip into you, where would it get its power from? It kind of asks like just basic questions like that. So if someone injected a microchip into you, where would it get its power source from? How could it, what information could it gather? How would it convey that? And just, you could also show that it's basically a physical impossibility to get a microchip that could be functional, feasible out of a needle that is microscopically narrow, to get that into your body to do that. So some of it's just seeing what's underlying these thoughts, challenging those notions, challenging the logic, showing why what you're saying and what you're saying is probably more plausible and more feasible. So part of it's just really trying to engage that. And then, of course, if there's some people who want to keep going, keep talking, then you got to also have, like I said, back to discernment, to be like, this conversation isn't really going to go anywhere. You wish someone luck. You invite them to come when they're ready to have an open conversation, and you kind of acknowledge concerns and also dispel myths where you can, and also just show why certain things just wouldn't necessarily make sense in of itself. It's just, it requires time, it requires patience, it requires, probably multiple reiterations of conversations and things like that. I don't think there's any good. Yeah.
Let me say this. Now, there are some questions that are more gray.
Yes, exactly. And that's where that's where the discussion lies, and that's what you say.
But but what about questions, for instance, about the DNA? Now, I've heard that coming up. Can the mRNA vaccine, these vaccines, change your DNA? Is that something that can be answered definitively at this time? Or is that something that we just don't know?
I mean, I think based on what I know about mRNA vaccines and how long they've been in production, because this is another picture of the story. This is a new way of doing or researching or looking at vaccinations, but it's been researched for multiple decades. People have been looking into this for a while. And based on the available data that is seen and what's being shown is no, there does not, because as Dr. Sutter was saying, it's a different process. Your body doesn't process this little bit of information the same way it does with DNA. And so when it gets used up, it basically your body breaks it down and disposes of it in and of effect. So there really isn't a reason for it to impact your DNA. So based on the mechanism and how things work, no, there isn't. And again, it's the same thing with anything else. People are asking for concrete, definitive answers in a world that frankly isn't concrete or definitive.
Right.
I mean, we don't really. If you want to cast a net wide enough, you don't know that the sun's going to rise in the morning.
Right. That's what I'm saying. There may be a chance of that.
Yeah.
But it's not likely, but
and it's not feasible in a lot of ways too. Like some of these things, like unless something is like the 1 in 1 billion fluke of something odd happening in the situation. I mean, you can't ever say anything for certain, but there'd be no functional reason why it would. Okay. And that's kind of how I would approach things like that when there are unknowns, but there also is a lot of good data that's around that. I would use that to say, this is why I would not really if I had to make a bet or put my money or say whatever on this subject, this is why I'm comfortable saying, yeah, no, that wouldn't do that.
Okay. We've got a couple questions about the trials here. And so with the trials being one right after the other, this is Elka Jackson, and so little time in between, how can we trust the results of phase 3?
Yeah, I can take that one.
And also, while you're taking that one, Calvin Roberson wants to know, what is the time interval between phase 1 and 2? So, if you know.
Yeah. So, well, in this case, there wasn't a time interval between phase 1 and phase 2. Generally, it would be whatever the drug company chose it to be, and it's kind of based on whatever they feel like the most efficient way or the most profitable way. That's typically how that would be chosen. In this case, the idea was to take that financial incentive out of this and encourage the drug companies to do it as quickly as possible. In the phase 3, it's variable. It depends on how quickly people get infected. So the way phase 3 works is you take tens of thousands of people and a certain percentage of them will get active vaccine and a certain percentage will get placebo. And then they get monitored to see who gets sick. And once a certain number of people get sick, normally for most of these trials it was 150, then they unblind and look, okay, of the people, of these 150 people got sick, who got the vaccine and who didn't? And from that, you get an efficacy rate. You start calculating. So it's variable. If there's very little disease, if there wasn't much COVID-19 going around, that phase 3 could have taken a year and a half. Because we saw such big case numbers, it was a couple of months, which is really, really fast. But it's only because there were so many people getting sick.
Okay. Do we know the percentage of minority groups that were in these trials?
I've not seen the phase 3 from Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, and I'm blanking on the other one, Novartis, it's not quite right. We don't have that phase 3 data yet. For Moderna and Pfizer, the ones that have approval, what they've quoted is about 10% of the people in phase 3 were African-American and about 13% were Latino. That is below, that's lower than what we'd like, and it's lower than the population averages. They were represented. There was I think there was a pretty strong push to try and enroll more communities of color. And so that's better than many drug trials. It's not as good as I'd have liked to see, but it is what it is, unfortunately.
Okay. Laura Dwyer is asking, which type of vaccine is appropriate for populations with autoimmune diseases that take biological drugs such as Enbrel?
Yeah, as I said, right now there's only one choice, right? It's an mRNA vaccine because that's all that's approved. As more vaccines get approved, as they probably will, I think we'll get better guidance on this. My best guess right now, without having a lot of data to represent that, is the mRNA are probably going to be good choices. The protein subunits are probably going to be good choices. The viral vector ones might end up not being the best choice, but we still want to see more information around that. So if you have a choice, I think mRNA is probably going to be your safest right now. And right now it's your only choice. So.
And refresh our memory as to which ones are the viral vector.
Yeah, so the Johnson & Johnson is a viral vector and the AstraZeneca is a viral vector.
Okay. And kind of a similar question, Sharita Brewer wants to know, is there any known danger in taking the vaccine if you have an autoimmune disease like sarcoidosis? I think I said that right.
No, there's not.
Okay.
What we think is that people, especially who are immune suppressed, like taking medications to suppress their immune system, may not get as much immunity out of the vaccine. They may also not get as much immunity out of a natural infection, just because we want the immune system to really attack either the vaccine or the virus to make that memory, if that makes sense. But there are no downsides to it. There's no contraindication. If you have sarcoidosis, it's fine to get the vaccine.
Okay, awesome. Okay. So with Walgreens and CVS providing vaccines in our long-term care communities for our seniors, for those that are ESL, has the state provided resources for the vaccine to be discussed, translated in their native language?
So I don't know that we've gotten much from the state, but we are partnering with Language Health Network to provide interpretation services and be able to help us communicate more effectively. There's ways to register there, so we've been working on that through our site. So we are aware of the issues of people who English is not their first language, and we do have some solutions for that.
Okay. All right. And Palermo, just to piggyback off of that, what have been your interactions, or have you had many interactions with people who don't speak English as their first language, who've had trouble in this area in terms of getting vaccines or understanding what's going on and with the distribution or registering?
Yes, registering is one of those challenges, and it's just providing the information, like where you set up an appointment with the health department or calling the number. So that's one way to do it.
And how is the city? How are you working around that? What services can be provided to help people?
Yes, so the city has a COVID-19 resource page right on the front tab of the cityoffortwayne.org. If you just check that on your browser, cityoffortwayne.org, and then you'll find the COVID-19 resource page. All that information related to the health department, to the state department, and also trying to find information on the getting a shot or registering for that. So that information is there. There's the language service network that is providing that translation for different languages, and we're grateful that everybody is collaborating to make this happen for our community.
So on the city's page, people who are not English speakers, they can have that translated into their own language to understand it?
There's information that they can click on the language they prefer to, so they can go to the Spanish. There's information on Burmese and others as well. So there is that help for them.
Okay. Good question from Maya Pfeffer. Are there state level efforts to gather the data that we were talking about, that demographic data, or to support the county health departments to do that?
Yeah, there are. And I would not say that there have been no efforts. There have been efforts. We had some issues, especially early on when contact tracing was going on and when the state took that over, that the data there was not very good. So there was data that was collected, but there's several months there where it just was not good data. That gets mixed in, and now we've got this gap. So we've talked about different ways to try and mitigate for that. So far, we just haven't had a good solution so that I can be really confident in what we're putting out there.
Okay. And another question for you, Dr. Sutter. Given the disproportionate impact of the virus, what is the state and the county's game plan for getting the vaccination into communities of color once it becomes more widely available?
Yeah, well, I'd start with kind of blocking and tackling. What we wanted to do first is have a really good vaccination site to get really good at, how do we get shots in arms and be efficient about that. One of the things we do is educate. So I don't know that me standing up and tell communities of color, you need to go get this shot and you need to be first in line is going to be very effective at all. I don't think that's going to work. So what we're looking for is community partners who become convinced that the vaccine is a good thing to do, who can work in communities and do that. And I'm happy to be a subject matter expert. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm happy to do whatever I can with that. What we've tried to do, since that is a north side vaccination site, is provide transportation. And we've gotten good support from CTN to provide free transportation for those people who don't otherwise have transportation. I did see a question too about the south side. There is actually a south side location. Neighborhood Health Clinic has 2 locations, and they are getting vaccine right now, so you can make appointments at Neighborhood Health Clinic. They're a good partner with that. There are more things in the works as we get more vaccine. Right now, though, we're challenged by the fact that we don't have near enough vaccine to even keep our Coliseum site up to capacity. So we can give 1,200 to 1,400 shots a day. We're ramped up to do that. And right now we're getting between 200 and 300 shots a day in terms of supply. So what we're trying to do is fill up that supply, get really good at getting shots at arms, and then start reaching out to the community and find other opportunities.
And just to clarify, Dr. Sutter, you're talking about neighborhood health. Are you talking about neighborhood health on Paulding or Calhoun?
Both their sites are offering vaccines right now. And I checked a couple of days ago, both of them had appointments available at that time.
Okay. And I can just add to that, Health Visions and some other groups affiliated with the Indiana Minority Health Coalition are working with the Indiana Department of Health, which has asked if there are sites within neighborhoods of color or communities of color that would be willing to do kind of, I want to say, vaccination events, so to speak, for one day. And so the National Guard and the state would send all the people that are necessary to those sites. And for, these one-day events, they would open that up in communities of color so that people would have access without having to be transported to those sites. And so that is something that we are working on. We are trying to identify a couple of those sites, But again, that is just a one-day event. It's not something that's ongoing. So hopefully we may be able to get some more sites on the South Side in addition to neighborhood health once supplies become available. Hopefully in those different communities. Okay, let me look at some of these other questions here. Okay, why is COVID mild for some and deadly for others? Anybody have the answer for that?
I'm happy to let Dr. McGee take that one.
I know. All right. So the short answer is we don't know exactly. This is all very new. I mean, truly, this is all very new. It's only been about a year before people have really been looking at this and paying attention. Some people think it could be due to what they call viral loads, how much virus is in your system. Some people think it has to be if you have underlying structural health issues with maybe your lungs or immune issues or other health issues. Personal immunity. People they've been looking at things if there's strain variants and things like that, or other situations if there's medication kind of interaction. So there's a lot of information, a lot of variables, and a lot of things to try to isolate out of basically a lot of static to see exactly what it is. But people have been investigating. I will say there's been a lot of effort that I've seen just in the available medical literature and in discussions with folks in the academic centers and things like that. People are looking into it. We just don't have any truly hard and fast answers as to why yet. But it still seems to follow the general trends. More kind of chronic health conditions you have, people seem to do worse. Older you are, seems to do worse. Sometimes associated or underlying health issues seems to do worse. So those are the general trends people are seeing. But as far as to really parse that out as to why now, it's still being looked at.
Okay. Emily Garate, maybe, wants to know if I had already experienced symptoms and then tested positive for COVID-19, what are the benefits of also getting the vaccine?
Yeah, I can take that one. So we think that getting the vaccine will likely give you better immunity than just natural immunity itself. Some of that's the concept of getting the 2 shots that we do. So when you get that second look, when your body gets that second look at the antigen, you probably make a better response. We don't know that for sure, but there's good reason to think that that's true. There is no contraindication. If you've already had COVID-19, it's fine to get the vaccine. We know that there have been people in the studies who had COVID-19 before, who had antibodies. They did fine. There was no increased adverse effects. The only thing we ask is if you're actively infected with COVID-19, if you're in that 10-day isolation period, don't go get your vaccine during the 10-day isolation period. We don't want you infecting other people. But there's no risk to previously being infected and get it that we're aware of, and it has been studied.
Okay, we've just got a couple of questions lingering here. I think some of them we have touched on. Is there a possibility of long-term effects and side effects? I think we've said, yes, there is that possibility. It's your decision to kind of weigh that against the effects or the possibilities of actually catching and contracting the virus, correct? And then we talked about a location on the South Side, Dr. Sutter. I don't know if that was answered directly. Is there a plan to have another location on the South Side, or are you just neighborhood health is what we're planning to do here?
Yeah, I mean, I think the plan, I shouldn't say it's a plan right now, right? Because things are moving so fast and changing week by week, is we're trying to stay a week ahead. And the state seems to be kind of the same way. So what we're trying to do is first fill up the capacity for what we've set up, and then set up multiple points. So it's not so much an or, it's an and. And so what we'd like to do is continuing to have more sites. Now that might be pharmacies, it might be doctor's offices. It makes sense to have a broad distribution of this so that it's as easy as possible to get the vaccination. But I'm not aware of another specific site that's been picked out on the South Side. Again, there's Calhoun and Neighborhood Health Clinic. There's the Paulding Neighborhood Health site. There may be mobile sites at some point in the future in underserved areas. All that's being talked about right now.
Resources for seniors who have transportation issues. You've already identified a partnership with CTN for those who have transportation issues. Is that basically a matter of just requesting that service, or is there something more that people have to do for that?
Yeah, my understanding is you just have to request the service. So we're using that right now, and CTN has been great partners with us for this.
And there's a prompt when you register online to do that, or when you call 211 and finally get through, maybe?
Yeah, 211 should be able to do it. I'm sorry, I'm not sure I know the answer to that specific though.
Okay.
But I can find out.
Okay. Meg Disler, can you advise of efforts to help non-English speaking individuals sign up for the vaccine? Likewise, are there vaccination locations where trained medical interpreters are regularly available during the vaccine to interpret medical information?
Again, as I said, we're working through our community partners and the language network for that. I don't think that they're on-site interpreters. I think it's over the phone, but there are attempts to be able to help at our site. I can only speak to our site. Again, I don't know exactly what it is for the signups. It's outside of my control. That's basically the state, and 211 is other governments. I remain focused on the parts that I can do, which is like getting shots in arms.
Okay, I think also to that point, with some of the things that Mr. Galindo was saying earlier, and some of the issues that people who are not English speakers do encounter, it would behoove us to have interpreters on site at the Coliseum, at the location that you do kind of oversee, maybe. And have that service there, so that people who are not English speakers can get that vaccine and understand what's happening, understand what's going on, and feel comfortable with that. Would you say that, Palermo?
Oh yes, that's certainly important to have. And I was also thinking about, maybe when there's more vaccine available, is to do with food banks. That will be a two-shot, pun intended, I guess, of someone getting their food and also getting their shot. I think that's something that could be done, and there's plenty of parking and space as well. So that's something that maybe we want to think about in the future. But it is important to have native speakers at these locations where the information is needed. Again, let's just think about, if we go to, let's say a different country and we need to get a vaccine, you don't really know how to communicate, and you're afraid, and you are not used to the process of, either providing information, looking someone that has a mask on, and, it's just, everything is just something very unnerving, and you're afraid to it. So, having empathy and providing information, and maybe walking with some people that need that service, that could be comforting, because they could tell their own family members that they had a great experience and that they felt safe. And that's what we want to convey, that message to our community members, that all the places are taking care of our community. Is just getting that fear out of our system once we experience that.
Okay, thank you so much, Palermo. I think that point is well taken, and we've got some questions coming in that we probably won't be able to get to because we are running out of time. Talking about the vaccination registration process, we hit on that just a little bit, that people can register online. What's the website, Doctor?
myshot.in.gov.
Okay, and they can call into 211. One thing to look at, and I think that's what this question is getting at, is for people who don't have access, for older people who internet access online, and for older people who don't have that or find it difficult to wait online with 211. How do we serve those populations and ensure that they too have access to this vaccine if they are wanting to take it, if they would like to take that? So I think those are all things that professionals such as yourself, Dr. Sutter, Dr. Mcgee, Palermo, Mr. Galindo, can take into consideration. How can we best make this available for people who want to take it, and take down some of the barriers, take down the barrier of the internet if you don't have internet access, remove the barrier of transportation if you don't have transportation? How do we remove the barrier of the language if you don't speak English? How do we tear down those barriers? Man, I wish I had said that about 15, 20 minutes ago so we could have a discussion on that specifically, but I think we've touched on it throughout this Q&A. However, that is something that we as professionals, I know there are a lot of advocates here on the line, will continue to think about. It's something that we will continue to work on throughout this process. And as we steadily move along, working with the state and the federal government to make things better for everyone involved. Any closing comments?
Sharon, I just want to say, I think that point's very well made about taking down barriers.
Yeah.
You know, we have limited resources. We can't take down every barrier, but it is something that I'm thinking about, something that we're planning for, something we're trying to do our best at.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Dr. McGee, anything you want to leave us with, maybe a myth or a tip or something that you want to make sure people leave with?
All right. Well, first I want to say thank you for putting this on. Thank you for having this and giving us the space to have this discussion and kind of have kind of answer questions that are available and at least kind of lay the basic groundwork of what's going on. Best thing I could suggest to people in general is, do the best with what you have. If you can do things like wear your mask, wash your hands, keep your distance, things like that, I would encourage you to do it as much as you can. I'd encourage you, if you have questions, talk to, trusted healthcare providers or trusted individuals or, trusted resources to have these discussions. I'd encourage other members of the community to keep facilitating discussions like this so we can, have these conversations and talk about these things and really kind of get down to it in a real way. It's just this is a big new issue with a lot of in a resource constrained environment and people trying to do the best you can with what you got. And again, if you have questions, I'm always open to talk to you about it. If you even have a hesitation, you're always welcome to come by and address that at any point in time to have these discussions. And encourage everyone to take the best care of your health that you can. And you're always welcome to come and get questions answered.
Okay, well, Dr. McGee, that was a loaded statement you made there, because now you're gonna have to give up your email address or something so they can contact you and ask you more questions.
We'll figure something out, maybe some more forums, something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, yes, and before I move on, Mr. Galindo, I'm going to come to you next for closing comments. We are way out of time. Well, not way out of time. We're a little bit over. And before you continue signing out, for those of you who have to go, there is a survey. I should have mentioned this before. You're going to get connected to a survey. When you sign out, that survey is going to come up, and we really want you to fill out that survey so that we can better serve you, Indiana Minority Health Coalition and Health Visions, in the future with these types of informational webinars. So please fill out that survey. Galindo, Mr. Galindo, there you go. What's your closing comment? Myth, tip, what?
Sure, it's I believe it's a civic duty and a moral duty to provide information that it's trustworthy, and we are educating our community members and our family members to get the best because we are again unprecedented times. It's something that we haven't seen over 100 years. Or before with the SARS, but it's been a while. And I think that we need to galvanize and really put the effort to our community members that we are getting the best information from trusted resources and having these conversations with doctors and you as well, that we need to provide that information mostly available to anyone that needs it. And let's just continue to move forward. I wish everyone health and wellness and blessings to all. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to give a big shout out and thank you to Dr. Sutter, Dr. McGee, Mr. Galindo. We certainly appreciate your time. This has been a great time of information for us. A lot of questions have been answered, and you're getting a whole bunch of kudos in the chat and on Facebook. And so we really appreciate it, and thank you so much. Remember that we will be sending you a link to this webinar. Please share it with your communities, and that I'm saying that to everyone who is participating right now, because we believe that many people will benefit from knowing what we've shared today. Thank you so much, and until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon.